Great. Okay.
So good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Christy DeJesus, and on behalf of the entire WPI Innovation and Entrepreneurship team, I would like to thank you for joining us today and welcome you to the next installment of the Mentors in Residence interview series titled Navigating the Unknown. Today, we are thrilled to have Mentor in Residence Scott Harris, who is co-founder of Onshape and SolidWorks. And today, Scott will be sharing and discussing his insights and experience about UX testing and why it's an integral component to creating world-class products. So, Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be presenting today. I'm going to apologize in advance if we have any technical difficulties, which we hope we won't. And I will hopefully share the right thing here. Okay. Does everybody see my screen? Excellent. Okay. I'm going to stop my video just to save on a little bit of bandwidth too. So, all right. So let's get rolling here. This is me on a slide here. Takeaway here is my career has been really all over the map. I started my career as a mechanical engineer at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. Then I got the CAD bug. I got really interested in computer design and jumped into it, and that's what I've been doing for like the last 36 years. So my role has been generally designing products for engineers, particularly for mechanical engineers. And I want to talk a little bit, start off with about the design process. It's really important to note that design is a really iterative process. It's social and messy. There's a lot of starts. You got to try stuff. You got to do stuff. You got to break things. If you're not breaking things, you're not doing it right. You know, it's good to start off focusing on large, complicated sort of functional elements in data flow, and then working your way into features and then things like dialog boxes, and as you get more refined. But you got to test the basics first, otherwise you're kind of building a house of cards. You know, if your initial assumptions aren't right, then you'll never get the final product right. So. So we've done a lot of UX testing over the years. The goals are typically to look at workflow. You know, it's not about the icons and the window decorations. It's much more about insights to how people work and their thought process as they're designing things. You know, workflow is really about how the features blend together. Do they make sense together? Does the progression of how people work with your product, if it makes sense to use the features as they're presented? Does it leave you in states that make sense? If you exit one thing, are you in a place where you can begin the next logical thing to do? UI discovery is really about, are things in the right place? Do things, if people are looking at like if they mouse click on something and expect something to happen, if they right mouse button over something, are they looking, you know, they're looking in a right mouse button menu for a particular item that makes sense to be there. Yeah, I call it looking where the, you know, look where the light is, you know. And one thing that we've done in our products, and is particularly good with web-based products, is you can instrument your UI such that you know what everybody's clicking on, and you know the entry points. So you know if there's two ways to get to something, and that people are using predominantly one way to get there, and ignoring the other way, you can do like features the same way. We spent a huge amount of time thinking about what to name things. It's amazing how much time, how hard it is to actually come up with the right names for things. So as you're in whatever products you're looking at and trying to design, you should pay real attention to what you call things, how you name things. Make sure that you don't name, that you don't have, you don't use the same, different names for the same thing. I've seen that a lot in different products. So you just have to be really careful that you're getting the nomenclature right. One thing I like to do is I like to just listen to people, how they describe stuff. You know, without even putting anything in front of them, ask, what do you do? You know, how do you work on things? What's your data flow? What's your design process? And you can get a lot of insight to how people think and what they call things as they tell you about what they do. User journey is actually very interesting. It's really about sort of the system, you know, and you think about, you know, how the system works, how pieces fit together, what's important to the user, how does it update, how is it supported, what's the ecosystem surrounding it. One quick anecdote is, you know, I have this collar, I have this new golden retriever puppy, and I have this collar that's very advanced. It tracks him. It tells you how many steps he's taken. If he's lost, you can find him with it. It has BLE beacon. It has, you know, a SIM card in it. It's all this stuff. It has Wi-Fi. But the people who designed it didn't really take people with my usage in account. Like we go off in the woods a lot. We run around with the dog. We hike. I trail run with him. And I'm really concerned about him getting lost. If he's lost, I want to find him. I want to see where he's been, that kind of thing. But they've sort of gone over the top to design this thing to be like a Fitbit for dogs. And to be honest with you, it's like a line drive down the third baseline, right? They almost got the home run, but they really missed a really major use case for their product by making this crazy battery life that lasts for like 3 months. But they don't realize that people tend to take the collars off the dogs at night, and I just take it off every night and put it in the charger anyway. So they've kind of done some funky design decisions based on certain assumptions. And I think if they really tested how people want to use their product, they could do a couple of firmware tweaks and really get it right. But anyway, enough said on that. It's never too early to start UX testing. Get the basics right. You can test things like, if you don't have your product ready, test competitive products. Get people in front of or holding a competitive product. Watch how they use it. Test other products that work in that same environment. So it may not be a competitive product. In our case, we could test things like how people use Google Docs, because we're doing cloud CAD. So how they use other cloud cloud products. We gained a lot of insight by watching people use our competitors, use existing products that would operate in a similar environment. Also, if your product's not ready, mock something up on paper. It can, or low res mockups. You can always test something. One of the things we did, we were starting to design a tablet product. And I'd hand somebody an iPad, just hand them an iPad and say, and watch how they hold it. And then say, oh, by the way, we want you to use CAD on this iPad. Every one of them then turned it into landscape, you know, holding it so it was landscape. It was very insightful when it came to just how people interact with products. Don't leave anything untested. You know, observe how people behave while they're using something. Do they drink coffee while they're using your product? Do they want to stand up and move around? You can ask people, and we do this all the time, describe what's on your desk. What other software products do you use? There's a lot of things you can get just from understanding people's environments. You can also look at workflows. You know, one key insight I had when I was designing the Onshape sheet metal was I interviewed people. I watched what they design. I watched designers design stuff, and then I'd walk over and I'd talk to the people who do fabrication of the sheet metal. They're usually different shop, different people. And I would ask them, they would take in the CAD model. This is a competitive CAD system. They would take in the CAD model and then they would redesign it. I'm saying, well, why are you redesigning it? You just got handed the whole model from, they're like, well, yeah, but it's not designed for the gauge we use. It's not designed for the tooling we use. And a lot of times it's not, it doesn't minimize the welds. It doesn't, there's a lot of things that they do that we refactor the whole model anyway. So my key insight was why not, let's design a sheet metal package which allows people to refactor the model without having to change any design intent, without having to redesign the whole thing. So it was really insightful. I never would have got it without actually really looking very early on, before we wrote any code for it, understanding what the workflows were and what the user journey looked like. In this case, it was a user journey from design to the actual fabrication of the product. So I'm going to talk a little bit about process. Again, I'm going to weight it a little bit towards my experience with Onshape, but it does generalize nicely for most products. It also works, there's a lot, you can also do this online. And we did a lot of our UX testing through Zoom. And given our new reality, it applies quite well. So involve everybody in the company. As my UX mentor, Steve Krug, says, make UX a team sport. The subjects, don't overanalyze who you pick for your subjects. You're going to learn from virtually anybody who interacts with your product. It helps if there's some affinity for your product, or there are people who might end up being customers. However, don't go into don't let it stop you until you find the perfect test subject. Test everybody. There's always a facilitator involved, and that can be you, or it can be somebody on your team, or somebody who's specialized in it. But the main thing is not to have the facilitator interfere with the actual test. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The other thing is all the stakeholders in the company. We had all of our executives took place. Our sales guys came in. All of our design team, our QA would be part of it. All the development people were an integral part of the process. So everybody in the company should be part of this process. It's not just a bunch of people go off and do the testing, come back and report it. People should have a real feel for watching how other people use your product. It helps across the entire company. So just sort of talking about the setup a little bit, we always start with this boilerplate message. I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. We tested a lot with Zoom, as I mentioned before, and you can do that with having a facilitator, having the test subject in their own environment, and having a observation room. In this case, it could be just everybody in their own Zoom session, but just muted out. And so during the test, the subject should have it just should be between the facilitator and the subject. Later on, I always bring in I always involve the rest of the people that are online. Always good to record it. Never record faces. Always record the screen and the audio. Always get permission before starting the recording. And again, if you're doing it online, if it's software, you can get people the software. You can set up temporary passwords, get the data sets all straightened out before the test starts, and then just go to town. Here's just an example of the boilerplate. We just had a script and we just read it. People don't care if you read it. It sounds a little bit hokey, but the idea is, the message to get across is, it's the software being tested, not you, not the subject. There's no such thing as a wrong answer. You really want to get people's honest reactions, and emphasize that they won't hurt your feeling if they tell you something sucks. In fact, that's what you really want to hear. Is they think something sucks, you want to know it. Tell them to think out loud, ask a lot of questions. Now, the interesting thing about asking questions is don't answer them. You just want to record that they're asking the questions. As a facilitator, you actually want to just sit there with stone-faced silence. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the representations can be all over the place. We used paper prototypes, for example. We would actually have people, we'd put the piece of paper in front of people and we'd put up a little dialogue box and we'd say, okay, now press on something that looks like what you want to do and then just say click. Okay? And then we take the bit of the dialogue, like the dialogue box you see in that graphic off, and we put another dialogue box on or another graphic on. You can learn a lot even from the super low res, super hokey kind of representation. You can use these. We actually do a lot of mock-ups. This is like Balsamic or one of the mock-up tools. And you can actually do you can wire it up so it works a little bit, but just having taking people through this and what do you see, what do you think, lends a lot of insight. A lot of nomenclature issues come up here when you're starting these iterative designs very quickly. You can actually change them on the fly and have people react to the changes. And then finally, there's full on. This is another example, but you can do full on testing of prototype software or hardware, and it works super well. The types of tasks that you can ask people, I call this passive or observational task. Basically you and these are, by the way, these are actual ones that we use. So the screens that I'm showing you are real ones that I just pulled out of tests that we did a long time ago. They're all anonymized. They're all anonymous just to make sure that, because privacy is super important here. I actually would love to be able to show you the recordings and snippets of these, but we represent that we'll never use them for anything except our internal use. So you never violate those. Anyway, observational tasks are basically, you say, look at the screen. Tell me what you see. What does it feel like it does? What looks right? What looks strange? And it's not about about the user getting it right or guessing. If they don't know, they should just say, I have no idea what this looks like. You can ask them to take a stab at it. They might give you some insight to how far off you are. But it's really not to see whether the user gets it right, it's to see whether you got it right. There's active tasks. Again, these are scripted. There's usually a little bit of graphics involved, such as like, do this, like make this. And you'll even can enumerate the tasks to do. So the tasks should be very clear and they're very short. Tasks that take me about 5 or 10 minutes to do always take about an hour for you in a UX test. So you're really, and you want to, and that's long for UX tests. You want to typically keep UX tests to about maybe 40 minutes or so to leave time for some post-test interrogation and conversation. So keep the test short, keep them simple, and again, watch carefully what people do. It can get very awkward, right? You're sitting there and somebody's like, well, how do I do this? What's that? This doesn't make sense, and just sit there. It's kind of awkward. People do get upset sometimes, but you can tell them, I'm not going to answer that. You can answer questions with questions. I mean, the only time that you really will say is, oh, what do you think it should do? Or what would you like to see here? But let them struggle a little bit now, because you're not going to be around when they buy your product and are trying to figure out how to use it, in their office or at home. So better let people struggle now to avoid it later. You can help people out of corners if they really get into a bind and they're down. You can suggest, backing up a little bit and trying to coax them into another direction. But otherwise, let people struggle a bit. Some of the tips I have for this are, you know, don't worry about the subject finishing the task. It's not about their goal. It's really about their journey. So and sometimes the journey can be a little interesting and not necessarily even towards the task. Sometimes people will lead you away from the tasks into weird corners. But if you're learning something by it, just let them keep going. It can be very insightful. Sometimes they never get back to the task, but you'll go off on a tangent that will be completely insightful and helpful, even another part of the system. So if you're learning, let them, keep going with it. Then, so the users will typically go through, they'll complete something, or they'll time out. And then what I like to do is I like to wrap up. And what I do is I bring the observers and the users or test subjects together. And basically I answer any questions that they've asked during the test in frustration or out of curiosity. And I let them basically talk directly to all of us who are involved with designing the product. So I think it's good closure. It's also really good closure for example, developers. Developers watching, I've had developers watching a UX test actually make change, there's the beauty of cloud-based systems, but make a change online during the test and fix an issue during the test. And then during the observation, during this wrap-up session, go back and say, oh, by the way, I fixed it while we were talking. Can you go back and test it and look at it again? And they would go back and like, oh yeah, this is great now. So it's really interesting some of the what happens in these tests. After the tests and the subjects have gone home or we've signed off with them, we'll do a follow-up session with, basically I call it insight session, but basically we debrief on the tests. And that's where a lot of ideas come out. I'll show you a little bit more of what that looks like in a second. I also post all the results of tests publicly in the company, usually by the cafeteria or somewhere where people can really see. Again, it's a team sport. Everybody should be involved and aware of what parts of the system are doing really well and what parts need some work. We also do what we call SUS, which is System Usability Scale. I'll talk about that in a second as well. So this is what it looks like post-session. We actually use sticky notes. We write all over the place. We argue about what people like, didn't like. Everybody can look at, so we have like good, bad, and aha. So again, we sort of list out the insights. We pay a lot of attention to these sticky notes, and we talk about ways to fix the problems. It's very rare that if you ask a user what do they want, and they'll tell you something that's really generative. They typically give you some incremental like I want this faster, I want bigger icon. It's very, I call it the carbon fiber buggy whip. It's basically, it's not necessarily changing the way people work. It's just trying to make it easier and faster instead of eliminating the problem completely, in which case like automobiles did with buggies. So this is what the board looks like after the insight sessions. We also have a spreadsheet we used for doing some sensitivity analysis and a little bit of ranking for what people observed and the severity of the issue. So we do a little bit of science behind it just to keep us honest with what we feel to figure out what things are important and what to emphasize. Here's an example of a posting. Again, I blanked out people's names here, but the idea here is to just give a general observation about different parts of the system, what the results were, and what we're doing to mitigate. the issues. It actually goes a long way when it's a public document. Quick idea on SUS. We didn't use SUS too heavily. We just used it to look at trends more than anything else. It's not that. It's very subjective, and it's not particularly informative, except to give general trending over the usability over many tests and over a long period of time. Just jumping a little bit about design, because design is, this is all integral part of the design. So again, the messy, social, and iterative part of design is just an important factor. And you're designing products for people. And so it's important to think about persona when you're designing things. Just basically language, needs, workflow, and to look to see how your software is going to match it, both as a product and as a user, but also for the market that you may be addressing. So you have to really be very deliberate about who you're designing for and why. So this is just one of our, we have probably 10 personas that we worked with extensively at Onshape. These are composite people. They're fictitious. There's no Carlos. These are just names put up. But they're very deliberate as far as people and their attributes. And so Carlos is just one of them. But you sort of try to get into their head about their goals, their values, what they like, what they don't like, what their ambitions are. We even went so far as to look at the workflows, sort of the day in the life of people, what their group structures were, what their pressures were, what their anxieties were, and try to figure out how to make our products better to fit into what they're doing. We also did things like images, just sort of as inspiration boards for the kinds of, these come out with both the products we design, but also the examples that we might use in our literature and our marketing stuff. So there's also, some of the ways that the design comes out, whether you want to overload a feature, for example. We have in Onshape, we designed a feature that was super automatic, and like whenever you closed up a bunch of surfaces, it automatically like made a solid. And it turns out that was really complicated for people. And so we, instead of overloading this sort of surface combinatorial type of feature, we just created an enclosed feature to make it simple. So sometimes, you want to keep the feature list down for sure, but sometimes it's better to have couple of simple things rather than overloaded things. I already told you a little bit about the workflow journey for sheet metal. That was a pretty good example. The human interaction one, again, the example with the iPad for which watching how they interact with a piece of hardware is a good example of that. Looking, I mentioned also looking where the light is and just placing the UI where people expect it. It's pretty simple. And casual comments that people make, it's so funny. They can be overlooked completely. But I have an example here of, we didn't have this little legend at the bottom, and we figured, it would just be self-explanatory that if you're doing a draft analysis, that one color might show one thing, one color might show another, and people would just get it. And people would look at there and they're like, one person's like, well, what do these colors mean? I don't get it. I understand draft analysis, but I don't understand what these colors do. And so we just, oh, okay. So we put a little legend in there, and there's never a problem after that. So it came out, just casual comments can mean the world downstream usability. So I'm just going to take a quick second to talk sort of about a little bit about life. you know, we're doing this meeting on Zoom, and you know, the world has always recovered from crisis, but it's always been changed by crisis. And you know, when the dust settles, things are not going to be the same. And new workflows, better ways to do things, better ways to deliver things are going to be needed. So you know, I urge everybody to really get creative. There is a lot of need right now for solutions that are, you know, with business model solutions, technology solutions, workflow solutions, and there's tremendous opportunity to improve people's lives in the given sort of the new reality. So just think about that as you move forward, and the types of products that you're working on, and how, you know, how can you be creative about solving problems based on social distancing and other factors that are coming into play. One last thing I'll say is, mentioned before, Steve Krug. Yeah, he's my go-to resource. It's a book called Rocket Surgery Made Easy. It's a super easy read, and here's just a little plug for his book. If you want to learn more about this, this is a good entry point. So anyway, that's it for me. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Scott, thank you so much for that. Right now, if anybody has any questions, you can either ask them right now. Everyone is on mute right now, just as a reminder. Or you can put on your video and we can chat that way, whatever you find convenient. So ask away.
Hey, this is Donna, and I will try and move to a new location so you guys aren't staring in the sun. Scott, that was super helpful, and I found myself reflecting back on my years on how smoothly that UX experience went. And can you talk a little bit about when it didn't go smooth? And honestly, and trying to think how I can improve for myself, I can remember sitting into some sessions where things weren't going well, and in the background, everyone's like, you picked the wrong screens. That's why they don't understand. Or you have the wrong people. What do you do in situations like that? Or we had a person who always quoted Madman. He would just say, well, they just don't know what they want. We just have to tell them. And you're like, oh.
Yeah, that can be a really frustrating, because look, the test subject is the customer, and they're not wrong. Okay, so you know, you might get frustrated because somebody's not clicking on the right screen, but that's how people use the system, and that's you have to lead them to it. If they're not getting it, it's your problem, not their problem. You know, UX tests can go off the rails a little bit. We had one person who got very irate and was a little bit vocal, to the point that it was a little bit awkward because they were so negative, and that can be a little bit of a disheartening to a design team. You know, you get, you know, a bunch of engineers that just designed this prototype, and this person's using it and they hate it. But, you know, in a way, that's life, and that's, you know, people are going to hate it whether the engineers are, you know, there or not. So it is healthy to understand. You know, you have to have a thick skin, and you really want people to understand that they're not insulting, unless they maybe do it in an insulting way, which sometimes happens. But you try to keep people are generally extremely thoughtful about their comments. They're also really love doing it. I mean, they want to be invited back, and they, you know, so most of the people who we've tested asked, can I do this again? So it usually comes out as very positive experience, even though they may not have gotten through the tasks.
Thank you.
Scott, this is Christy. I have a question. Before you, in your presentation, you talked about how you sit and watch, and sometimes that's awkward. Do you have any tips about how you don't jump in and help them, because like you said, you want them to organically walk
Yeah.
through this or try to figure it out. Do you have any tips or tricks that you could share with us, how to just, sometimes silence is very uncomfortable, but how do you put yourself in there and just let them go on that journey?
Yeah. You just sit there quietly, and you might, you can keep an active like, again, if they ask questions, it's really hard not to answer a question. They're asking you a question. Well, what if I do this? And the answer is usually, well, what do you think would happen? What would you want to happen? Or on occasion you say, go ahead and try it. And so the idea is not to answer their question. The idea is to either deflect it and let them, back to them to sort of let them continue working with it. It's only if you really see things going, just they're not getting it, like to a point that they're never, it's just, it doesn't matter how much longer they're going to do it. And what you do there typically is stop that task and move on. If they've spent like a lot of time for a task, totally banging their head against the wall, say, okay, we're gonna move on to the next test. Because at that point, it doesn't matter that you get them back to it. So again, it takes practice, and I would just say practice.
Great, thank you. Donna has submitted a question through the Zoom group chat and said, Scott, this has been great. Any advice for how to find UX testers for new products during the lockdown?
Sure. If there's always chat groups, there's always, if it's a software product, you can go to user groups for other products. That's one of the first things I did when we first were starting SolidWorks. The very first thing I did was join the PTC user group, and I went to user group meetings, and I met tons of people. So all of the initial interviews and customer interviews and testing was all done on people who used and often liked competitive products. In fact, it's people who like the competitive products that often make the best testers, because they're going to be the most vocal about what you've done wrong and why this other product's so great and things like that. So there are groups and resources to find online for getting and people, don't be too shy. People who post to forums and post to things, in serious user groups, they love it when another product comes along and says, hey, we're trying to, I've never made any misrepresentation. I went to, pro engineer user groups as we're starting a new CAD company and we want to meet people who use CAD. So, you didn't have to sneak in or anything. I was full on disclosure of what we were doing there. So.
Great, thank you. I do have to ask, I've gotten a couple group chats and a couple private ones directly to me wanting to know what you're working on in your workshop. People are amazed by the background. So can you give some insight? There's a couple people that their curiosity has piqued.
So let's see, where to begin? I mean, gosh, I've got a bunch of parallel projects. The main thing I'm doing is we are designing these COVID face shields. These are they're NIH approved DTM designed face shields. So I've got some pretty decent print capacity in my shop with a Gigabot and a Stratasys printer. So I've been printing that. I've got a breadboard of a project I'm working on here. That's basically it's a ESP32 with a little motor controller. It picks up my dog's Pico. It picks up his collar, that fancy collar I was telling you about. It uses Eddystone Bluetooth, so I have it picking up, and I'm designing a latch for a dog door, so he'll be able to run securely through a dog door and then have it close up based on the signal from his collar. Yeah, those two big projects. I'm designing a new extruder for my Gigabot. It's going to use planetary gears instead of a different type of extruder. So yeah, there's a bunch of things I'm designing. I've got to keep busy.
Well, thank you. Yes, because there were quite a few people that asked and said it looks amazing in the background. They wanted to know really what you were spending your time on during the stay-at-home time. So thank you. Any more questions out there? Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, thank you so much, Scott. I do want to remind the audience that Scott does conduct his Mentors in Residence weekly hours, the mentoring hours. So you can go on to startuptree.com. If you have any questions, you can contact anyone on our team, particularly Jasmine Jones, who is the manager for that program. So thank you again, Scott. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We are recording the Zoom session. We will make it available to a broader audience. So thank you again. Everyone stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.